that's probably about as romantic as this record gets in a way, but it's a very dirty track in a lot of ways. It's kind of about the inspiration that I get from my wife, really. You know, she does definitely bring the sunlight to me. I know that sounds kind of, might embarrass some people, but I genuinely mean it. You know, I get a lot from her love and, you know, companionship, and that's something that really means a lot to me, and it's kind of a way of honouring that. But, you know, sex is a lot better with love, I've found over the last 22 years, you know. That, I think we sort of talked about that. I mean, there were three characters that I knew. I changed the names of the people, but yeah, it's to do with where we are at this current moment in time, you know, locally, nationally and internationally as well. I think that we're really at the edge of something really, really frightening, and we're led by people who aren't qualified to lead us. I really believe that, and they seem to be sorting out their own backyards out much more than they're sorting ours. You know, they're supposed to be there to represent the people, and they're sort of not representing the needs of the people, dismantling the NHS and basically asset stripping the country, finishing the job that Thatcher started, and I find that frightening. And also it's a reference as well to the strangeness of living in Sheffield that creates cutlery and knives and surgical equipment, really high grade stuff, and we've got such a horrific knife problem, and I just don't get it. I really struggle with that, and I know the basic motive that anyone carries a knife is fear. It's rather than an act of aggression, so that kind of means people don't feel safe. Do you know what I mean? And it's about that, really. And just having lived through Thatcherism, where I know that the acts of specifically this government, where it's going to lead us, and a lot of us are not going to have a great time living through this at all, and it's really about that, really, you know. And our people's lives can just literally slide away, all their ambitions and hopes, when we get... Because I don't think it's all about austerity measures, you see. What I think it's about, and the fact that we are in this financial mess. I know that we are to a certain degree, but there are 68 million people living in Britain all paying tax, well, unless you boots or, you know, some corporate multinational that doesn't seem to have to pay taxes like the rest of us.
Yeah.
That, you know, to me it's about imposing a set of ideals that are at total odds with anybody who's into socialism, or even with a little s, that, you know, the decision should be made for the majority, for the good of the majority rather than the minority. And that's just obvious right in front of our noses. I find it sickening, really, because they got away with it in Thatcher's times, and it just seems like it's happening all over again, you know. And I'm also a parent of an 18-year-old daughter and two boys, and just watching her trying to find a future for herself, and there's just fuck all out there for them, you know. And I find that really, it makes me angry, basically. It doesn't have to be that way. Yeah, down in the woods is a lot of my time there. There's a lot of dangerous things in the woods. I've taken them, I know. But again, that was kind of a reaction to one of the first things that this government did when they got in, which was to try and sell off all the woodland. And I was completely and utterly horrified and really, really angry about that. And I know, you know, my grandparents and a lot of our country's grandparents fought for free access to land, and, you know, the simple pleasure of being able to walk in the woods and to get away from all the bollocks of life that people have to put up with, and that to be taken away from us, to be sold to some of their chinless wonder mates, I thought was an outrage. And it is, you know, like that line in the song says, before the day these woods are sold, I would like you to know that I love you. and I might actually be saying to the woods that I love them, or to whoever. But no, it's a reaction against that, really. Yeah, I was outraged completely. That was probably the quickest song, that and the last one, to write. They were really, it just came to me in a flash, from a tiny little piece of guitar riff on a dictaphone tape, and I just started playing this riff with the lads, and by the end of, I think, 5 minutes, it was done, you know. But that's kind of about seeking perfection and always being disappointed with what you've got. You know, I had my fortune told, and it said that I would meet somebody with green eyes, but yours are blue. You know, and not being actually satisfied with what you either have or what you might actually find, is to be constantly looking for this sort of false vision of this perfection, really. And it's just, you know, it's probably the most humorous song, if anything vaguely. It's tongue-in-cheek, you know, especially the middle section going on about it. I managed to get a vandalised bus seat into the lyrics, 'cause I remember John, our keyboard, saying, I was writing the words, and he sort of looked over my shoulder and he says, "Vandalised bus seat, how are you going to get that into a fucking song?" I says, "I'll bet you 50 quid I can." And he says, "You don't, you're on." So I managed to get that in and into the context of the song. But yeah, with someone that you're kind of happy with, that that you are happy with somebody that you're with, that you'd sit anywhere with them, even on a vandalised bus seat. You're not looking for this perfect sort of place to be, you'd be content anywhere, you know. And I think the art of being happy is not actually constantly seeking this mythical perfection, because I don't really think it exists, you know, and it's all airbrushed anyway. I ended up like having one of the most fantastic days I think I'd ever had with one of my children, and we took a kite to fly in the park, and just that simple pleasure of doing that. I was reading a book about Isaac Newton at the time, and Lou was just staring into the sun, and it really freaked me out because he's going to damage his eyes. And Isaac Newton was he was actually an alchemist. He was really into turning lead into gold, and he never managed to do that, but in a weird kind of way, through staring at the sun for hours and hours, that he did that to see what would happen, and it burnt his retina so badly that everything he saw was burnished gold. So he kind of got what he wanted in the end, and he had to wear shades for the rest of his life when he was really old. And that was a component of it, and that sort of a very domestic event happening like that, I really wouldn't want that to happen to one of my boys. And then the second verse was kind of about coming home from that, and my wife bought me a telescope, and which actually is still in a box, so I don't know why I'm the idea of it anyway, about, you know, staring at the stars as well. And it was a thing that a friend of mine really, it blew my mind actually. It was in a car park at the back of a pub, and I was asking a fellow musician, and I was asking how he was, and he was telling me that his wife had just passed away, and it really broke his heart, and how he sort of, when he was at home every night, he was into astronomy, just looking at the telescope trying to see her face in the stars, and that just completely blew my mind. I thought it was one of the most amazing things and heartbreaking, and that's kind of, and then that song just explodes in the middle, and that's kind of what it is. It's a lot of things.
It is. Yeah.
It's a journey home after a long day in the park. It's flying a kite, and yeah, and then what my friend said to me as well. It just seemed to be all within a couple of days, and it really, everything in that just kind of, yeah, blew my mind really. The Wood Collier's Grave, yeah, that was in the beginning was inspired again by sort of just walking with the dog in the woods. There's a great place called Ecclesall Woods in Sheffield that's got a fantastic sawmill, and they make kind of chainsaw sculptures out of trees, old trees and stuff. It's really boss, one of a mermaid that I quite covet actually. Where I put it, I don't know. Next to telly. And during those kind of walks is that I discovered, this was on the advice of a friend of mine called J.P. Bean, who wrote a book called Sheffield Gang Wars, amongst many, many other things. And I found this, it's one of the most, he reckons that it's kind of one of the first monuments that had Sheffield on the name, and it's the Wood Collier's grave is for a guy who was the charcoal burners that used to live in the woods, very solitary people, and he called George Yardley, and there's like a gravestone there that's surrounded by railings in the middle of these woods, and it's a really strange kind of thing. And it was paid for by the local landlord of the Rising Sun pub, which is not too far from there, in 1786 I think, something like that. So it's a very old part of Sheffield's history. It was one of the first places that had the name Sheffield on it. And George Yardley, sadly, he burnt to death in his cottage in the middle of the woods, and it was paid for by a local gamekeeper and a besom maker, and that's actually people that make brooms. A besom maker is a broom. Brilliant. and a salesman as well. And I presume that these kind of characters were sort of people that just used to go in the pub, and that they were friends of George Yardley and decided to pay for a monument to him, you know. And in the woods as well, there's all these like Neolithic works of art that they're quite difficult to find, but what they call cup and ring kind of stones that they've had. Neolithic works of art, and I found that really fascinating. It's a right laugh hanging about with me, and I just kind of, me being me, I'd sort of been reading a lot about our ancient history, the Green Man and the Lady of the Wood and all that, and I kind of had this sort of fantasy that George Yardley was probably in love with. I don't know whether in my mind I don't know whether she's a wood nymph or just a nymph, you know, or that he had a kind of a love affair that didn't quite work out, and you know, the inevitable bad thing happened to him. It's not a particularly cheery song, but it inspired me to write that song. And again, it's kind of about, you know, how precious that woodland is to us. To me, it's just massively important, apart from the fact that trees are fundamental to and plants fundamental to us actually existing. They give out oxygen and we give out carbon dioxide, and it's like a symbiotic relationship, you know, and it's kind of about that. It's my little fantasy of what might have been happening to George Yardley. That was kind of, it's not as easy to talk about really, but he's one of my closest friends, Tim McCall, passed away. He was the guitarist that he took over from me in Jarvis's band when I no longer could do that because of commitments on my own, and I won't go into it for his family's sake, but it wasn't good and he was really young, and it made me kind of really, that event sort of kick-started this record in a lot of ways and made me sort of try to make sense of this life, and it's quite difficult to make sense of things like that and get your head around it. I find it just almost impossible, but I suppose what that's about is it's about body of work in whatever a person does. But you know, there's a line in the song that talks about when you leave a room, what do people think of you? You know what I mean? It's not just a physical body that we leave behind, it's also other people's thoughts of us and how we conduct ourselves throughout life, and are we capable of being kind, you know? And I refer to that as well in the beginning part of Down in the time of the winter, and it is about reflections on that really. I don't want to spell it out to people. I think that they'd be smart enough to understand what that's about. The last track before, that was another one that was really quick. When you kind of make an album, the nearer you get to the end, sometimes it can be quite tricky, and that was really tricky. It took a few, it didn't take, once it kind of arrived, if you like, the song, it was written really, really quickly, and I didn't realise it was any good until quite a bit of time after, and it just seemed to be the perfect finisher to the album. And I don't want to spell it out too much what it is and spoil it. I think that people get what that's about, and I'll wig out a bit on the guitar. And, yeah, it's one of my favourites. I think Colin, our bass player, it's his favourite, you know, and it was good fun to make. The whole record was really sometimes tricky. It was a long process, you know, it was 14 months to kind of, when I suddenly realised, I was writing songs when I was supposed to not be, that 14 months later I'd got a finished record. So it was a long, convoluted, winding path to get there, and some ups and some downs along the way, but it was a really interesting process to make this record, and I'm really grateful to the opportunity to make another album, and hopefully if this one does well enough, I'll have the opportunity to make another two.